What if the life you're searching for isn't waiting on the other side of certainty? What if you never actually need proof before you take the next step? In a world obsessed with evidence, reviews before we buy, tracking numbers before we trust, confirmation before we move, Paul says something that sounds almost reckless. We walk by faith, not by sight. Not maybe, not sometimes. That's the whole instruction. So, what does that actually mean? In this teaching, we're breaking down 2 Corinthians 5 piece by piece, so you can understand exactly how to live this out even today. Before we define faith, we need to understand who's talking and what he's going through. 2 Corinthians wasn't written from comfort. Paul wrote this letter after being beaten, shipwrecked, and rejected by the very churches he planted. In chapter 4, just before our passage, he describes himself as afflicted in every way, perplexed, struck down. This is not a man theorizing about faith from a place of safety. This is a man defining faith in the middle of the fire. Think about how unusual that is. Most people only talk confidently about trust when life is calm. It's easy to say trust God when nothing is threatening you. But Paul is writing this in the opposite condition, exhausted, physically marked from beatings, uncertain whether he'd survive long enough to plant another church. And in that exact condition, he doesn't write a letter about giving up. He writes one of the clearest teachings on faith in the entire Bible. So when he opens chapter 5 talking about the body as a tent, a temporary structure, not a permanent home, he's not being poetic for poetry's sake. He's a man who has stared down death multiple times, telling you exactly how he's still standing. 2 Corinthians 5:1 says, "For we know that if the tent that is our earthly home is destroyed, we have a building from God." Paul is making a contrast. The tent equals what's temporary. Your body, your circumstances, your current chapter. The building equals what's permanent. What God is constructing that you cannot yet see. A tent is functional, but it was never meant to be permanent. It flaps in the wind. It can collapse in a storm. It needs constant maintenance just to keep standing. Paul is saying that's exactly what this current season of your life is like. Useful, real, but never meant to be the final structure. Something more permanent is being built underneath it, whether or not you can see the materials yet. This sets up the entire passage. Sight equals what's visible, temporary, and changing. Faith equals what's unseen, permanent, and secure. And here's the key truth Paul is building toward. You were never designed to run your life only on what you can verify. You were designed to walk by something deeper, something that doesn't collapse the moment your circumstances do. The phrase shows up in 2 Corinthians 5, verse 7, "For we walk by faith, not by sight." Walk here doesn't mean a single decision. It means your daily pattern, the way you move through ordinary life, how you make choices, how you handle fear, how you respond when you don't have an answer yet. It's not a single leap you take once. It's the posture you carry into every Monday morning, every diagnosis, every hard conversation. And faith isn't blind guessing. It's trust based on a track record. Think about a pilot flying through thick cloud cover. She can't see the ground, she can't see the runway, but she trusts the instruments in front of her because those instruments have been tested and proven reliable thousands of times before. She's not flying blind. She's flying by something more dependable than her eyes in that moment. That's exactly what Paul means. Faith isn't the absence of evidence. It's evidence of a different kind: character, history, relationship with God, over the evidence of your current circumstances. The pilot doesn't ignore reality. She simply trusts a more reliable source of information than her own eyesight in that specific moment. Faith functions the same way. It doesn't deny what's hard or uncertain. It just refuses to let what's uncertain be the final authority. Notice what Paul doesn't say. He doesn't say walk by feeling. He doesn't say walk by understanding everything first. He says walk by faith instead of sight. Sight is what's right in front of you. Sight is the diagnosis, the bank account, the silence after the message you sent. Faith is what you trust is true, even when sight says otherwise. This is where a lot of people get faith wrong. They think it means pretending the hard thing isn't hard, or acting like everything is fine when it isn't. That's not faith. That's denial. Faith looks directly at the hard circumstance and still chooses to trust something beyond it. It holds both things at once. This is difficult, and God is still trustworthy. Walking by faith means living in ongoing trust in what God has said, even when your current circumstances haven't caught up to it yet. Not once a week, not just during prayer time, daily, moment by moment. It shows up in how you respond to bad news, how you make decisions under pressure, and how you carry yourself when nobody else is watching. Paul doesn't present this as a nice spiritual upgrade. He presents it as the only way to actually live without being crushed by what you can't control. 2 Corinthians 5 verse 10 raises the stakes further, for we must all appear before the judgment seat of Christ. That's a heavy sentence, but here's the reframe worth sitting with. This isn't a courtroom built to terrify you. It's a courtroom that means your life is actually being weighed, which means your life actually matters. The most painful thought was never that you'd be judged. It's that nothing you did would matter enough to be worth judging at all. Most people are far more afraid of insignificance than they are of accountability. The idea that your choices, your faithfulness, your quiet obedience in private actually counts for something. That's not a threat. That's a relief. It means none of it was wasted. So why is faith essential? Because sight will always run out. Evidence will always be incomplete. You will never have full information before the next decision you have to make about your health, your finances, your relationships, your future. If you wait for total certainty before you trust God, you will wait your entire life. Because certainty about the future simply isn't available to anyone, no matter how much they research or plan. Faith isn't a bonus feature for the spiritually advanced. It's the only operating system that actually works when sight stops giving you answers, which eventually it always does. Every person reaches a point where sight runs dry. The question is what you're running on when that happens. Paul doesn't just describe the benefit, he shows what life looks like without it. When you only walk by sight, your peace becomes a hostage to your circumstances. Good news, you're calm. Bad news, you collapse. Your emotional state gets handed over completely to things you can't control. A test result, a comment someone made, a number in your bank account. This shows up in real life as constant low-grade anxiety. Checking your phone for confirmation you don't actually need, making decisions purely out of fear of the worst-case outcome, and a peace that disappears the moment circumstances shift. It can also look like over-researching every decision, needing other people's approval before you'll commit to anything, or replaying worst-case scenarios late at night when nothing has even happened yet. It's not always because someone is doing something wrong. Sometimes they're just exhausted, trying to navigate life by sight alone, needing proof before every step, certainty before every commitment, evidence before they'll allow themselves to hope. And here's the danger. You can look fine on the outside and still be completely run by fear on the inside. You can have a steady job, a full calendar, and still be quietly terrified every time you don't have an answer. That's why Paul repeats this contrast, sight versus faith, because he knows our default setting. We drift back toward needing proof. He's calling us back to trust. If this is naming something you've been carrying, comment, "Lord, teach me to walk by faith." And share this with someone who needs to hear it today. So how does this actually work in daily life? Let's break it into simple, practical steps straight from the passage. 1. Remember what's permanent, not just what's visible. 2 Corinthians 5:1 reminds us we have a building from God beyond the tent. Practically, this means when circumstances feel unstable, you remind yourself this isn't the whole story. There's something being built that you can't see yet. A helpful habit here is simply naming it out loud. This is hard, but this isn't permanent. 2. Let confidence replace constant need for proof. Verse 6 says, "We are always of good courage." Courage here isn't the absence of fear, it's choosing to move forward without demanding certainty first. Practically, this means making the next right decision even when you don't have full clarity about how it ends. 3. Live for what's unseen but ultimately true. Verse 7 again, we walk by faith, not by sight. Practical example. Instead of making every decision based purely on visible outcomes, ask what God has already said is true, and let that carry as much weight as what's in front of you. 4. Let your life be shaped by future accountability, not present approval. Verse 10 tells us our lives are being weighed by something beyond this moment. This reframes daily choices. You're not just living for how things look right now, you're living for something with lasting weight. That changes how you treat people when no one's watching, and how you handle integrity when cutting corners would be easier. 5. Receive your identity as a new creation. Verse 17 says, "If anyone is in Christ, he is a new creation. The old has passed away." Many people struggle to walk by faith not because they lack discipline, but because they don't believe they're actually new. You can't walk forward in faith while still standing in old shame. Faith and self-condemnation cannot occupy the same space for long. 6. Remember, you're not just rescued, you're sent. Verses 18 through 20 call us ambassadors. Walking by faith isn't private, it's lived out in front of other people, which means your trust becomes evidence for someone else's. Someone in your life is watching how you handle uncertainty, even if they never say so. When you actually walk by faith instead of sight, something shifts from the inside out. You experience courage that doesn't depend on outcomes. Verse 6, always of good courage. Not courage because everything is fine, but courage that exists underneath the circumstances, regardless of what the day brings. You stop outsourcing your peace to things you can't control. Your stability stops rising and falling with every piece of new information, every test result, every unanswered message. There's a steadiness that holds even when the news is bad. You live with eternal perspective instead of constant urgency. Verse 1's building from God means today's hardship isn't the final word on your life. It's a chapter, not the whole story. And that distinction changes how heavy today actually feels. You walk free from old shame. Verse 17's new creation means the failures you keep replaying don't get to define your next move. You're not negotiating with your past anymore. You're simply walking forward from a different identity. And you live with purpose, not just survival. The ambassador language in verses 18 to 20 means your life isn't just being preserved. It's being sent somewhere, carrying something that matters to someone else. That reframes even ordinary days. You're not just getting through them, you're carrying something through them. So what does it really mean to walk by faith? It means trusting what's permanent, not just what's visible. Not needing proof before every step, but moving forward with quiet courage. Not living for present approval, but living for lasting weight. Not standing frozen in old shame, but walking forward as someone made new. Not waiting for life to start mattering, but carrying something that already does. Paul didn't write this from comfort. He wrote it from shipwrecks, beatings, and uncertainty about whether he'd survive the year, and he still said, "We are always of good courage." Not because he could see the outcome, because he trusted the one who could. That's worth sitting with for a moment. The man who wrote the clearest words on courage in the New Testament wasn't writing from safety. He was writing from the exact kind of uncertainty you might be standing in right now, which means this isn't theory handed down from someone untouched by hardship. It's a tested conclusion from someone who lived it and came out still trusting. You don't need a tracking number for tomorrow. You don't need every answer before you take the next step. You just need to walk. By faith, not by sight. If this gave you language for something you've been carrying, like this teaching, comment, "Lord, teach me to walk by faith." And share this with someone who needs courage today. And if you want more simple, powerful biblical truths explained this way, subscribe so you don't miss what's next.